So, do we have a way or ways to write brave new chapters, maybe even a brave new ending to this period in American history, this time when white Christian nationalism is gaining power, this time when the essential humanity of so many beloveds is being threatened? Do we have a way? Maybe more importantly, do we have the will? All too often, to our peril, I fear, we don't invest in crafting the life-giving stories. Instead we just kind of give book reports about what they are doing. We read and study and listen to the stories all around us, and then we conjure up what can seem like an outsider's report on the book that someone else is writing, as if all the power lies elsewhere and that we have none. The concept of being simultaneously a character in and one of the writers of the story is somewhat challenging. Be we hero or victim, bystander or protagonist, lead character or just an extra, it's easy to sometimes feel the story is being written and played out by forces much larger than us. And yet I believe, and I hope you believe, if you have any faith in human agency, that we play a not insignificant role in determining how the story unfolds. We have the ability to tell stories that change the future, stories that we can live into for the sake of our children and our children's children. Thinking about book reports reminded me about that scene in You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, where the Peanuts gang has been assigned a 100-word book report on Peter Rabbit. Does anybody know this? The assignment is a report on someone else's story, a story that's already been written, and still each of them puts a personal spin on it. Lucy's kind of above doing a book report, sees it as stupid, uses a list of the vegetables in the garden, along with the conclusion, the very, 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 very end in order to reach 100 words. Linus, predictably, is a little over-academic, reporting on the psychological and sociological messages embedded in the Peter Rabbit story, and becomes so ethereal as to render his report inaccurate and kind of meaningless. And then there's Charlie Brown, poor Charlie. He's distracted, he procrastinates, he worries about how it's affecting him, about how he hasn't had enough sleep or enough time, so much pressure, so he makes a sandwich and never writes the report. And Schroeder, the artist and musician, struggles to find meaning in something so banal as Peter Rabbit. And he essentially does a book report on Robin Hood, trying to make some pretty dubious associations between the actions of Robin Hood and the rabbit. And we should learn something from Schroeder. Forget the assigned book. Tell a story that inspires. And yet I think of all these characters, liberals maybe most identify with that little underdog Charlie Brown. We hem and we haw and we procrastinate and we resist stepping into the limelight, preferring to remain unseen, even to the extreme of putting a brown paper bag over our heads. And this is especially true, I think, of Unitarian Universalists, because out of respect, we don't want to impose our story on someone else, so we remain quiet. We keep our story hidden. The most recent Ezra Klein podcast, in an interview with Chris Hayes of MSNBC, focuses on the ways in which attention has become the most important commodity in modern politics. Stories are being told by the right whose main purpose is to draw attention, just to be titillating. The meaner and the more outlandish, the better. It's not about the content, it's about making the news and to capture the spotlight, and in so doing, to keep control. And of course, Klein digs into how the left doesn't get it, hasn't played the game, has taken the high road, and in so doing has also lost the attention of many. Now, to be clear, Klein is not suggesting taking the low road. He's commenting on how going low is what seems to get attention. I think what I appreciated most in that podcast was their discussion about the difference between what gets our attention and what we think is important. They're not the same thing. Attention, as it turns out, has no internal moral compass. We simply look toward the noise, the bright lights, even when those things might be morally dubious, even lies, and still they get our attention and the attention of the nation. And so we write book reports on the stories being told by the attention grabbers rather than authoring our own stories. We lean into being the underdog, and we turn our attention toward things that aren't important. Tomorrow, another disturbing chapter will go down in history books, the second inauguration of Donald J. Trump. If you happen to be a supporter of his, so be it. I need to say this. Tomorrow, the possibility of America becoming a theocracy, a form of government where a deity or a religion is the supreme ruling authority, comes into clearer focus. Theocracy, even fascism, looms on the horizon. And if you're like me, you've been reading and listening to a lot of doom and gloom stories about the future of this country and of democracy itself. It's pretty easy to get sucked into that place. It feels so real and so unavoidable and just destined to be. Doom and gloom gets our attention. For example, this week I listened to the NPR podcast Extremely American, in which the hosts take an inside look at Christian nationalism. They tell a story centered around Pastor Doug Wilson, who leads Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. Wilson's vision for that small college town is to claim it for Jesus. He preaches that non-Christians shouldn't be able to govern. So congregants are running for public office. The church has been buying up the downtown. And that's just the start. He and his allies want to make the whole country an explicitly Christian nation. They believe that their particular kind of Christianity is the only right belief, that it is the ideal moral doctrine, and it should supersede all others. And don't think this is a small fringe group. They have many affiliated congregations across the U.S., very popular podcasts, dozens of books. There are 500 schools using a curriculum created by this group. They have very ambitious goals. They want America to be a theocracy. The story they tell is that there's only one right and true belief system. And I won't go into more details, but their story perpetuates hatred of the other. Be that an immigrant, a person of color, a transgender person, etc., etc. And it is this perspective, this story, that is seeped into right-wing politics and is getting the attention. It is a hateful, fearful, in-your-face story. I actually think that the reason dystopian fiction like that of Octavia Butler is so popular right now, because we're looking for alternative stories. The real ones are so hard to face. Chris Hayes, in that interview with Ezra Klein, speaks of the need for stories with a vision. He just isn't seeing them happening anywhere. But he talks about how stories that are the opposite of doom are so needed. He says we need to conceptualize utopias, better worlds. He says, quote, "I think it's probably really important to us, collectively and individually, to put our attention toward a vision of what we think something great would be. To use our attention to write better stories." And I believe it begins with us believing that we have an important story to tell. And we do. I believe that we have within us an "I have a dream" speech for these times. We just need to get it out. We have a dream, We have a life-giving story that the world needs. It's a story about people coming together to care for one another and for our earth. It's a story that insists on bodily autonomy, that tells of a common commitment to hearing all voices, that privileges the good of the whole over the privileged few. It's a story about a people who are motivated to act based on shared values of equity and interdependence and generosity. It's a story where no one goes hungry, where all have a warm place to sleep, where every being is affirmed for exactly who they are, where no one's in danger because of their identity, a place where decent wages make it possible for everyone to afford food to eat and a place to live. A world in which we care for our earth, taking no more than we can use and replacing what we take. King spoke so eloquently 60 plus years ago of how one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners would be able to sit down together at a table of brotherhood. And of his dream for a time when his children would be judged not for the color of their skin, but for the content of their character. And while we would use more gender-inclusive language today, the dream remains the same: justice and respect for all. Yesterday, I spent a couple of very cold hours at the state capitol listening to inspiring voices from right here in Minnesota, along with hundreds of other people. Voices of folks who are actively working for change, and to a person, they spoke of the need to unify, to act together, knowing that every action, no matter how small, has an impact because it changes the storyline. We need to act collectively to ensure justice for all, for women's rights, for racial justice, for reproductive rights, for trans rights, for disability justice, for climate justice, for food and housing for all. And never forget that all of these things are connected. Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And so rather than writing books about doom and gloom, we can use our creative powers to tell a different story and to write new chapters right now. We can live convinced that diversity, equity, inclusion, love, and justice are the values that must rule our country. I know many of you are doing this work right now. But what would it look like if we were all so convinced, so committed that we would act to tangibly create that world within our neighborhoods and within our schools and our businesses and our government and everywhere? I believe that telling and loudly sharing the story of our vision will help to bring this into being. Trumpism is not right. It's just loud. And in the face of this, and while we have to always keep informed about what's happening around us, we must turn our attention to what's happening, and we must turn our attention to a better story and to continue resisting and showing up and supporting those who are in danger and being loud and sharing this story. And we need to stop rejecting those story edits that would take us back into doom and gloom and instead really work to keep the dream alive. I think you know that I think that one extremely necessary element in our new story is community. We have so long lived the myth of the heroic and self-sufficient ego, and we've lost touch with the need for community, for coexisting with and working with others. Pastor Doug Wilson is not trying to take over Moscow, Idaho by himself. He has a whole community behind him. And while I can't support what they're doing, I do think that we can take a lesson from them about the power of acting together. One of yesterday's speakers shared these words found in, of all places, her horoscope for a day last week. Just listen to this. I love these words. There's a maddening paradox in play. While fairness may be a myth, so is futility. In the absence of justice, we can still act and we can find meaning in the cracks. If nothing is fair, then we can build something even better: purpose. Isn't that beautiful? Futility is a myth. We can still act and find meaning in the cracks. We can stop spending time writing reports about stories we don't believe in. We can build a better story, one with purpose and vision, and we can do it together. The only way we lose is if we stop fighting. So let me leave you with this quote from Adrienne Marie Brown. This is, to me, the most exciting thing right now. If we wake up, we are in a place where we can create so much history and so much change. Everything is falling apart, but also new things are possible. Octavius said that there's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns. We are in a time of new suns. We have no idea what we could be, but we can be mindful about that. It's like we're the action heroes. Once you wake up and recognize, oh, I can shape everything. I don't have to be a victim of someone else's vision. I can actually get to be a powerhouse in my story and the story of my people's lives. Oh, that's a different invitation. So let's live into that invitation, where we are powerhouses in the story of change. Let us cling to the story that speaks out of justice for all. So be it.